Any day I get to talk about Keith Haring is a good day. That's a sentiment me and my guest today share. Anyone who knows really anything about me knows I am a massive, massive fan of the artist Keith Haring. He's my hero. I've often had friends or even loose acquaintances send me a photo of a Keith Haring poster or sweatshirt and say, "Hey, I thought of you." And I always feel good receiving those messages. Yesterday, I was sitting at a coffee shop and I was wearing one of my many Keith Haring t-shirts, and this guy came up to me and told me that he actually met Keith Haring when he was 12 years old. They met at an art exhibition in Phoenix, Arizona, and Keith even drew on his Converse. He now actually proudly has those Converse on display in a glass box in his home. He told me that the encounter changed his life, that it got him interested in art, and he recently got to take his 9-year-old daughter to the Broad's Keith Haring exhibition here in Los Angeles. What a crazy coincidence. As it so happens, a few days before that, I got the opportunity to interview Gil Vazquez, who was a dear friend of Keith's and runs the Keith Haring Foundation. As you can imagine, this was incredibly special for me. Before we get into that interview, I want to quickly talk about Keith. Keith Haring was born May 4th, 1958. He grew up in Kutztown, Pennsylvania, and moved to New York to go to the School of Visual Arts. There, he befriended fellow artists Kenny Scharf, Jean-Michel Basquiat, Andy Warhol, and so many others. He started really taking off as an artist early in the 80s when he would do these chalk drawings in the subway. Back then, you'd have these black sheets of paper that were placed in advertisement panels in between ads. And Keith took this as a golden opportunity to create drawings on the paper. And there were these very quick drawings that he wouldn't plan out. They would just come out of him. Millions of people would go into the subway and see these drawings, and people started talking and wondering, who was making these images? From there, Keith did his first gallery show, which led to many other gallery shows. He did murals all over the world. He opened the Pop Shop, a store that sold Keith Haring merchandise as a way to continue to make his art accessible to the public. This was so ahead of its time, and it paved the way for many other artists. All of this before his untimely and truly unfair passing at the age of 31 of AIDS. He was more than just an artist. He was an activist. He was a brother. He was a son. He was a friend to so many. We'll touch on all of this and more. Take a listen. I'm Taylor Blackwell, and sitting across from me in downtown Los Angeles right now is Gil Vazquez, the president and executive director of the Keith Haring Foundation. Such an honor to be sitting here with you today. I know that you're a very busy man. You've told me you've had a hectic morning already today, so thank you for making time for me.
Thank you. No, any time that I get to talk about Keith Haring is a good day, so the pleasure is mine.
And we're sitting here very close by the Broad, which is having a Keith Haring exhibition right now, Keith's first exhibition in Los Angeles at a museum. It's called Keith Haring Art is for Everybody. I know that Keith in his lifetime, something that he felt a little upset about was that museums in America weren't really recognizing him in the same capacity that museums in Europe and other places were. So how do you feel about this? What do you think he'd feel about it? And what has been the general reception so far?
I think generally he felt that he wasn't respected by the American institutions in his day. And I feel that that has since changed. I feel that Keith's work resonates more strongly now than it did when he was making it. Some of the issues that he was speaking to persist. Police brutality, racism, the inequities of society, capitalism. Those are things that still persist and still resonate with people. So I feel that, he has arrived. Keith has arrived. And I think he'd be tickled at the attention that this show at the Broad is getting. I mean, I've been around exhibitions now for the better part of 30 plus years, and this one is, it is top tier. It is one of the best exhibitions uh, one of the best herring exhibitions I've ever seen.
I would say one of the best exhibitions ever. It blew my mind, and I hope everyone listening to this goes and sees it for themselves. It's running till October 8th, is that right?
October 8th.
Have you walked around? Do you listen into people's conversations about the art? What is that like?
One of my favorite things to do is to eavesdrop. So when I walk the show, I like to see reactions. I like to see how people interact with the work, the kinds of questions that they're asking. If it's young people asking an older person, what was it like during those times? Why does the art look like this? It's really interesting to hear the questions. There are people that feel that they are familiar with Haring, and then when they come to this show, they learn a lot about who he was, about what he cared about the kind of sort of truths that he was telling, speaking truth to power. They learn that aspect about Keith. He was an activist, and I feel most people may not know that. They may have a casual understanding of Keith Haring through the T-shirts that they may see at Uniqlo, that sort of thing. And it's just this show is a real eye-opener because it shows you the various aspects of his practice.
That was, for me, one of the reasons I wanted to do this interview with you, because I feel a lot of people of my generation, like you said, know the symbolism, are familiar with his name, but don't necessarily know the story. I think this exhibit's really going to be eye-opening for people in that regard.
Yeah, I think so. I think, when Keith in the 80s was out, proudly out, and proclaiming that, yes, I am HIV positive and this is something we should discuss, that was courageous for the time. It was not easy. It would have been easier for him to keep his mouth shut and not talk about his diagnosis, not talk about being gay, and he could have been very successful, and not had to address those things. But the fact that he chose to be out and proud is why I think he's regarded as a gay icon these days, because he did it when it wasn't easy to do.
I want to go back in time for a second. I'm just so curious about when the foundation started. Keith started the foundation in 1989. He passed in 90. What was going through your head at that time? You weren't always the president, were you, or no? So what was sort of the transition of being Keith's friend to now having the position that you now hold?
It's a really great question. I never worked for Keith while he was alive. We were just friends, and he asked me to be a part of his foundation in 1989. My first question was, what's a foundation? He explained it was a way for us to carry out his wishes and to continue his work, to elevate his work, to continue his generosity. And of course, I wanted to do that, and am still doing that. I'm proud to do that. And for him, it had to be difficult because he's facing his mortality. He's aware that he is sick, but he wants to be forward-thinking. He wants to think about his legacy. He's thinking about what happens when he can no longer be with us. Does the work die or does it continue? So he creates this vehicle in order for the work to continue to resonate, to continue to be shown to new audiences in different contexts. And he was very, very forward-thinking for a young man of his age. He's 30, 31 at the time that he thought about doing this. And when I think back, my goodness, such foresight. And here we are 30 plus years later, at one of the most magnificent shows that has ever been mounted in the city that is it almost manufactures pop culture, right? Mm-hmm. So it's the perfect place for it. the perfect time for it as well.
Why do you think this is the time? I know you touched on it a little bit earlier, but there seems to be such a rise in popularity with the 80s in general, with Basquiat. The Basquiat exhibit is right across the street from the Haring exhibit. Is Keith's art timeless? I think it is. But why do you think this is the moment where it's really reaching its... I think he might be more prevalent now than ever.
I think because of what's happening in the world, right? I think Keith was a product of his environment. He was a product of Reagan. He was a product of Mayor Koch. He was a product of HIV/AIDS. He was a product of crack. All the things that were happening in his time, you can draw parallels to today, to what is happening in our politics today, the divisions, the anti-LGBT laws that are being put into place, the repeal of Roe versus Wade. I mean, you can draw very distinct parallels to the things that are happening now to the things that were happening in the 80s, where artists were very emboldened and had to speak up. And I think that's why it resonates so much now.
Do you feel like artists today have that same brazenness?
Not all. I think some. I think there are some artists out there that feel that it is their responsibility as an artist to speak up. People like J.R., people like Banksy. They in addition to making beautiful art, I think they feel that it's a responsibility of an artist to give back and to speak truth to power.
Not only am I a huge fan of Keith Haring, but I'm such a fan of what you all are doing with the foundation. Is there any upcoming projects that you're able to talk about, things that you guys are working on?
As far as the foundation goes, what we like to do is we like to collaborate with folks that are doing amazing work. Folks like the LGBT Center in New York, folks like Ali Forney, shelter for kids, for LGBT kids that get kicked out of their homes by their parents. I mean, I'm a dad, so that is just, it's profound to me. I cannot wrap my brain around someone kicking their own child out into the street because they are who they are. So that cause is very near and dear to me, very near and dear to Keith. So we make sure that work gets funded.
What is it like getting to share this journey with your family? And what do your kids think about all this?
Well, I have my daughter on this trip with me, so it's great. She actually goes to the school that Keith went to, the School of Visual Arts.
Oh, wow.
So she, in a sense, is following in his footsteps, and it's amazing. It's passing the torch. It's teaching the lessons, teaching the history that took place, and hopefully, drawing something from it and learning something from it to pass down. It is super special to me to be able to talk about Keith and his importance and spreading the gospel of Keith Haring throughout the world.
Is there something you are hoping people walk away from after seeing this Broad exhibition?
I want them to more than just see it. I want them to feel it. I want them to not only use their eyes, but I want them to feel this exhibition. I want them to put themselves in the shoes of a young man who painted and who wanted to share, who wanted everyone to be exposed to art, not just the elite. Somebody who had something to say about political issues, somebody who had something to say about police brutality. I want people to feel that man.
That really brings me to my last question. I know that Keith was a really spiritual person. He would see pieces of paper on the street and he thought that they were messages for him, and he studied symbolism and believe that chance favored the prepared mind. That was one of his favorite quotes. And I'm wondering if you're a spiritual person and also being around these pieces of art all the time, do you feel his presence in a way? And how has your connection to these art pieces changed over time?
So, my goodness, in terms of spirituality, Keith was, I mean, you could feel him in a room. Any room he ever walked into, he was very spiritual. We talked about coincidences often, and messages and symbols. And I ran across a quote that made me think of him. And the quote was, "Coincidence is God's way of remaining anonymous." And I thought that was so profound because, you know, you have a Keith Haring show at the Broad, you have a Basquiat show across the street. What a coincidence. And that quote was an Albert Einstein quote, somebody who was like super smart and knew things about the universe that, you know, very few of us did. So it is a really special show, and I really hope everyone comes to see it, comes to feel it, comes to enjoy it, and take what you can from it. You know, a lot of the works are not titled purposely. Keith did not want to define the work for you. He wanted you to stand in front of it and have it mean what it means to you. So please come to the Broad and do that.
Do yourself a favor, come to the Broad. Gil, it has been such an honor speaking to you. Thank you so much for this. Keith Haring, Artist for Everybody.
When we think about other famous artists, typically they had decades of work. Keith created thousands and thousands of pieces of art in just a decade of being a working artist. I never got to meet Keith Haring, but in a sense I feel like I have, through looking at his art and also being able to meet people who knew him. What amazes me about Keith Haring is how he continues to touch so many lives, myself included. His art makes people happy, while also inviting them to explore bigger questions about ourselves and the world we live in. I think I'll let Keith have the last word here by reading you a quote of his. He said, "I think I was born an artist. I think I have a responsibility to live up to that. My contribution to the world is my ability to draw. I will draw as much as I can for as many people as I can for as long as I can. Drawing is still basically the same as it has been since prehistoric times. It brings together man and the world. It lives through magic." I'm Taylor Blackwell. Thank you so much for listening.